Somewhere beneath the surface of the ocean, far from the noise of cities and the brightness of screens, there is a kind of quiet that is almost impossible to describe. It is deep and patient and very, very old. The ocean holds a history that stretches back further than almost anything we can imagine. Hundreds of millions of years of life, of transformation, of creatures appearing and vanishing and changing into something entirely new. And somewhere in that long, slow story, a small, jawless fish, swimming through a shallow ancient sea, became over unimaginable stretches of time, the ancestor of something as enormous and graceful as a whale. That journey is what we're going to follow tonight. Not quickly. Not with rushing timelines and dense lists of names. We're going to move the way the ocean moves. Slowly, gently, one layer at a time. This is a story told in deep time, in the kind of time that is difficult to hold in the mind all at once. But we'll take it together, step by step, era by era, from the first creatures that ever grew a backbone in salt water to the great mammals that eventually returned to the sea and made it their home again. It's a long journey. And if you're already settling in, getting comfortable, letting the weight of the day ease out of your shoulders, then this is exactly where you're supposed to be. Before we begin, we'd love to know where you are right now. Drop a comment and tell us what time it is and where in the world you're listening from. It's something small, but there's something genuinely wonderful about knowing that someone in a quiet room in one part of the world is drifting into the same story as someone on the other side of the globe. We're spread across so many time zones, so many climates, so many nights, and yet here, in this moment, we're all listening to the same ancient sea. So wherever you are, thank you for being here. Now, close your eyes if you like, or let them rest soft and unfocused, because we're going back a very long way back to oceans that no longer exist and to the first creatures that began to change everything. The oceans we're going to enter first are not the oceans you know. There are no coral reefs in brilliant colour, no whales, no sharks, no fish with scales catching the light. The world we're moving into is older than almost anything we have words for. It is the Cambrian period, roughly 500 to 540 million years ago, and the seas are warm and shallow and teeming with forms of life so strange they look almost invented. The atmosphere is different. The continents are unrecognizable, clustered together in configurations that no map has ever shown. There is no grass on land, no trees, no forests. The land itself is bare rock, scoured by wind and rain. Everything that matters, everything that is alive and moving and trying, is in the water. And in those waters, something new is beginning to take shape. Not a fish, not yet, but something that carries, hidden inside its soft and simple body, a set of possibilities that will eventually become everything. These are the early chordates. Small, soft, filter-feeding creatures swimming slowly through warm, shallow seas. They look almost like worms at a glance, but if you look more carefully, something is different. Running along the length of the body is a structure, flexible and rod-like, called a notochord. It gives the body shape. It allows for movement in a way that wasn't possible before, a kind of coordinated side-to-side flexing that could propel a creature forward through the water. This is a small thing, but small things, given enough time, become enormous things. Alongside the notochord, there are the beginnings of a nerve cord running above it, and gill slits near the front of the body, and a tail. These traits taken together are the foundational blueprint. They are the rough sketch from which all vertebrates, all creatures with a backbone, including us, will eventually be drawn. One of the most famous early examples of a creature like this is Pichia gracilens, a small, leaf-shaped animal found in the remarkable fossil beds of the Burgess Shale in what is now British Columbia. When paleontologists first examined these fossils in the early 20th century, they weren't entirely sure what they were looking at. It took careful reanalysis, decades later, to recognize that Pichea might represent one of the earliest known chordates. It is a fragile piece of evidence, and scientists remain cautious about exactly where Pichea fits in the larger family tree, but the creature points to something real. Something like it was swimming in Cambrian seas, and something like it would eventually give rise to everything that followed. The fossil record from this period is extraordinary in some ways and frustratingly incomplete in others. These early creatures were soft-bodied. They left no bones behind because they had none yet. What we know of them comes from rare deposits where fine sediment buried animals so quickly and so gently that even the outlines of soft tissue were preserved. These windows into early life are precious and rare, and they are always being reinterpreted as new specimens are found and new techniques are developed. Reconstructing the earliest chapters of vertebrate evolution is a little like trying to read a book where most of the pages have been torn out. What remains is suggestive, sometimes stunning, but always incomplete. Still, from these fragments a picture assembles itself slowly. By around 500 million years ago, the first true vertebrates had appeared. These were the jawless fish, creatures without teeth, in the modern sense, without jaws at all, but with a new development that would change the ocean entirely. Bone, or something very close to it. A hardened outer covering, a kind of armor made of mineralized tissue that protected the body and, critically, could be preserved. This is why the fossil record suddenly becomes richer at this point. For the first time, these animals were leaving something solid behind. These early jawless fish are grouped broadly into what scientists call the agnosons. The word simply means without jaws. And while the name might make them sound limited, what they could do was remarkable. Some were small, just a few centimeters long. Others grew larger. They moved through shallow coastal waters, estuaries, and the floors of ancient seas, using their mouths to filter sediment or draw in small organic material. Their bodies were streamlined in ways that older, slower organisms were not. And they had something that would prove to be one of the most consequential innovations in the history of animal life. A head. More precisely, a concentration of sensory structures at the front of the body, clustered around what would eventually become a brain, eyes that could detect light and movement, chemical receptors that could sense the water around them, structures sensitive to vibration and pressure. This gathering of senses at one end of the animal meant that the creature could actively perceive its environment in ways that were simply not possible before. It could respond. It could orient. It could, in a very early and limited sense, navigate the world rather than simply drift through it. This is the beginning of something profound. Not intelligence, not yet, not anything close, but directionality. Awareness, a body that moves towards something or away from something based on what its senses are telling it. It is the first faint outline of what will eventually become, hundreds of millions of years later, a mind. The swimming ability of these early fish also opened new ecological possibilities. Before vertebrates, the ocean was mostly a world of creatures that filtered, drifted, burrowed, or clung. Movement through open water at any real speed was rare, but a streamlined body with a flexible notochord, and later a true spine, could generate propulsive force. It could pursue, it could flee. It could reach food that was unavailable to slower animals. These advantages compounded across generations, and evolution, as it so often does, ran toward them. Among the best-known fossils of early jawless fish are forms like Hyquicthys and Milocunmingia, found in Cambrian deposits in China's Yunnan province. These creatures, only a few centimeters long, show what appear to be early vertebral elements, fin structures, and sensory organs near the head. They are not perfectly understood, and their exact relationships to later fish are still being studied. But they suggest that by the early Cambrian, the vertebrate body plan, in its most basic form, was already present and already swimming. It is a quiet beginning. No drama, no size, no power, just a small soft creature flexing through warm ancient water, carrying inside its body a set of innovations so fundamental that they will not stop compounding for the next 500 million years. The sea moves slowly around it. The light filters down in pale columns from a world above that holds no life worth naming yet. And somewhere in that gentle current, in that patient, ancient water, the first chapter of our own long story is being written, one careful swimming motion at a time. Time passes. Millions of years slip by in silence, layer upon layer of sediment settling on ancient seafloors. The small, jawless vertebrates continue their quiet lives, feeding, fleeing, reproducing. They are successful enough to persist, to diversify. But for a long time the basic pattern remains the same. Then, slowly, the front of the face begins to change. The simple round openings used for sucking in food and water start to stiffen around the edges. The bony plates that once just served as armor, shift and hinge pieces of the skull reorganize under the pressures of chance and survival. What began as stiff supports for gill arches becomes something more flexible, more powerful, more dangerous. A jaw. It is hard to overstate what this means. With jaws, a vertebrate can grasp instead of just sip. It can bite, tear, crush. It can hold on to something that is trying to get away. For the first time, fish are not only filter feeders or bottom sweepers, some of them are hunters. Alongside jaws, another quiet revolution takes place. Fins, once small stabilizing flaps along the body, become more defined and paired, one set near the front, another toward the back. Like the beginnings of arms and legs, these paired fins give control. Instead of just undulating forward in whatever direction the body happens to point, an animal can bank, rise, dive, turn sharply. It can hover in place. Combined with a strong tail, it can surge through the water with purpose. Jaws and paired fins together turn a simple swimmer into an active predator. By the Silurian Devonian periods, roughly 440 to 360 million years ago, the seas are filling with these new kinds of fish. Many of them are heavily armored, clad in thick plates of bone that cover the head and sometimes much of the body. These are the placoderms, the plate-skinned fish. Some are small, only a few centimeters long, living close to the bottom, feeding on invertebrates. Others, like the famous Dunkleosteus, reach enormous sizes for their time, several meters long, with jaw plates sharp enough and strong enough to shear through shell and bone. They are not alone. Another group, the acanthodians, sometimes called spiny sharks even though they are not true sharks, glide through these same waters. They are less heavily armored, more lightly built, with rows of fin spines and streamlined bodies. Where placoderms are like swimming fortresses, acanthodians are more like skirmishers, combining speed with modest protection. And alongside them, the first true cartilaginous fishes begin to appear. Early relatives of modern sharks and rays, with skeletons made mostly of cartilage rather than heavy bone. They are, at first, overshadowed by the great armored fish, but their light skeletons and efficient swimming styles give them advantages that will matter later. These new vertebrates move differently through the ocean than anything before them. They are not just passing through their environment, they are actively reshaping it. With predators that can chase and bite, prey can no longer rely on drifting quietly or hiding in plain sight. Shells thicken, burrowers dig deeper. Some animals evolve spines, others toxins, others speed. The dance between attack and defense becomes more intricate. Every improvement in jaws or fins or sensory systems on one side is met, over generations, by some countermeasure on the other. The structure of the food web changes as well. Before, much of the energy in the ocean moved slowly, through filter feeders and decomposers, through animals that grazed on microbial mats and plankton. Now, energy can be channeled rapidly upward into large, mobile predators. A single successful hunter can gather, in one bite, what might have taken a filter feeder hours or days to extract. This concentrates power in a new way, and opens opportunities for scavengers that follow in the wake of the big fish, for smaller hunters that specialize in different prey, for everything that lives in the shadow of larger mouths. Different fish groups explore different strategies. Placoderms invest heavily in armor and jaw strength, dominating many coastal and reef-like environments. Acanthodians and early cartilaginous fishes explore speed and agility in open water. Early bony fishes, which will become more important later, experiment with lighter internal skeletons and new fin arrangements. Each lineage tests a different balance between protection, mobility, and feeding style. Competition is part of this story, but so is opportunity. As plants begin to creep onto land and rivers change their courses, new shallow seas and coastal habitats appear. Each newly flooded shelf, each lagoon and estuary is a fresh stage awaiting colonization. Fish that can move efficiently, that can tolerate different salinities or temperatures, that can exploit a new food source, slip into these spaces and radiate outward into countless forms. Over time, the diversity of jawed vertebrates in the sea becomes astonishing. Some crush hard-shelled arthropods and mollusks, some sieve tiny plankton with delicate gill structures, some lurk and ambush. Others roam widely in schools, relying on numbers and speed rather than armor. What began as slight changes in the bones around the mouth and the placement of fins has transformed ancient oceans into far more active, layered, and complex systems. There are now top predators, mid-level hunters, specialized grazers, armored defenders, agile escape artists. The water is full of motion and intent. And yet, even this is not the peak of what fish will become. The great armored giants that rule these Paleozoic seas will not last forever. Other lineages are waiting in quieter corners, refining lighter bodies, more flexible jaws, and subtler fins, preparing, without knowing it, for the next chapter in the ocean's unfolding story. The Devonian is sometimes called the Age of Fishes, and in these seas the name fits. The great armored placoderms still patrol reefs and coastal shelves, their heavy heads and crushing jaws asserting dominance wherever they go. But around them, other lineages are quietly taking advantage of a different approach: less armor, more finesse. Among these are the early true sharks. Their skeletons are made mostly of cartilage, strong yet light, allowing them to grow large without being weighed down. Their bodies lengthen and taper, turning into flexible, efficient torpedoes. Their tails develop powerful asymmetrical lobes, driving them forward with steady sweeping strokes. Fins that once only stabilized now steer, adjust, and fine-tune their motion with delicate precision. Their senses sharpen, too. Some can detect faint vibrations in the water, the signature of struggling prey far beyond sight. Others begin to pick up chemical traces in astonishingly low concentrations, following invisible trails through the dark. These early sharks are not quite the creatures we know today, but the outline is there. Roaming hunters at various sizes and speeds, some built for relentless cruising, others for abrupt bursts of acceleration. Over hundreds of millions of years, their shapes will change again and again, but the basic plan proves so effective that sharks will outlast many of the giants that overshadow them now. They will survive multiple mass extinctions. They will see continents reassemble and break apart. They are, even in this distant time, a lineage built for endurance. While sharks refine the art of being agile predators in open and coastal waters, another great experiment is unfolding in the bones of different fish. These are the bony fishes, the osteichthyons, whose skeletons are composed mostly of true bone rather than cartilage. At first they are small and relatively unobtrusive, overshadowed by the armored titans around them. But within this group an important split begins to form, a fork in evolutionary possibility. On one branch are the ray-finned fishes, the actinopterygians. Their fins are webbed with thin, flexible rays, like fans stretched between delicate supports. These fin rays can be spread wide or folded close, allowing subtle adjustments in lift and drag. The bodies attached to these fins become increasingly diverse, long and ribbon-like, deep and flattened, streamlined like darts, or compact and maneuverable. Ray-finned fish explore almost every way a body can move through water. Some will become sprinting hunters, others slow grazers, others careful pickers among rocks and corals. Over time, they will come to dominate the open seas, rivers and lakes of the world, but for now, they are still in the process of learning what is possible. On the other branch are the lobe-finned fishes, the sarcopterygians. Instead of thin rays, their paired fins of thick fleshy lobes, supported by sturdy internal bones. Within those lobes are hints of familiar patterns. One large bone, then two, then branching segments. Later, this internal structure will be echoed in arms and legs. For now, it gives these fish powerful paddles, able to push against the bottom, to pivot, to rise and fall with surprising control. Some lobe fins stay in deep or open waters, their heavy fins serving as steadying outriggers. Others move into shallower habitats where the ability to push off the substrate, to heave or crawl slightly, can mean the difference between being stranded and slipping back into safety. They are not walking yet, but they are experimenting with new relationships between body and ground, water and air. Around these evolving bodies, the environment itself is becoming more varied. Reefs built by corals and other reef-forming organisms spread across warm sunlit shelves. Their intricate frameworks create a three-dimensional maze of ledges, crevices, and overhangs. In these spaces, small fish find hiding places, while agile hunters learn to dart and weave through narrow gaps. Color, shape, and behavior begin to matter in new ways. A slender body that can slip between branches, a flattened form that can rest against the reef face, a mouth turned downward for grazing algae, or upward for snapping passing plankton. Along coastlines, tides and rivers shape muddy estuaries and shifting sandbars. Here, water conditions change quickly, salinity rises and falls, temperatures fluctuate, oxygen levels vary. Fish that can tolerate these swings find a rich buffet of food washed in from both land and sea. Some develop bodies suited to hovering near the bottom, sifting detritus. Others cruise just below the surface, ready to seize anything swept along by the current. Farther from shore, in the open water, different strategies arise. Some fish form early schools, loose but coordinated groups, where many eyes and many bodies offer safety in numbers. A predator may capture one, but the group persists. Sleek, fusiform bodies excel here. Narrow heads, tapered tails, fins set to reduce drag and maintain high-speed travel with minimal energy. All of these habitats, fifths, coasts, open ocean, become stages for a growing drama of interaction. Predator and prey test each other in countless small encounters day after day, generation after generation. As jaws become more flexible, able not just to close but to protrude, twist and grind, new feeding styles appear. Some fish nip at corals and shells, others vacuum small invertebrates from crevices. Some develop crushing tooth plates for hard-shelled prey, while others refine sharp needle-like teeth for gripping slippery, fast-moving food. Prey respond in kind. Bodies flatten so they can press close to the seafloor. Coloration shifts toward camouflage, mottled and banded patterns breaking up outlines in dappled light. Spines grow taller and more numerous. Some fish swell their bodies when threatened, making themselves harder to swallow. Others evolve toxins in their fins or skin, turning themselves into dangerous meals. The food web becomes layered and intricate. There are now herbivores nibbling on algae, detritivores cleaning up organic debris, planktivores straining tiny organisms from the water, mid-level predators stalking them, and top predators hunting the hunters. Energy flows in many directions at once, branching and looping, creating a network rather than a simple chain. In this age of fishes, the ocean is no longer just a vast space filled with simple swimmers. It is a mosaic of niches, each with its own pressures and possibilities. And in filling these niches, vertebrates are trying out designs that will echo far beyond the water. The ray fins are perfecting light-efficient skeletons and intricate fin control, blueprints that will one day support explosive bursts of diversity in every aquatic environment on Earth. The lobe fins are refining sturdy, limb-like supports and lungs or lung-like sacs that can gulp air at the surface, features that in some lineages will eventually allow movement onto land. Sharks and their relatives are demonstrating how a streamlined body, keen senses, and a cartilage framework can produce hunters that persist for hundreds of millions of years. Their long history becomes a thread of continuity through upheavals that lie ahead. All of this experimentation, all of this branching and refining, make the Devonian seas a kind of quiet rehearsal. Here vertebrates learn how to be fast and slow, armored and flexible, solitary and social, benthic and pelagic. They learn how to exploit light and shadow, current and stillness, shallow warmth and deeper cold. When later vertebrates leave the water behind or return to it in new forms, they will draw on these ancient solutions. They too are thou on these ancient solutions. The bones in a limb, the curve of a fin, the sweep of a tail, the pattern of teeth in a jaw, all carry the memory of this time, when fish ruled the seas and the possibilities of vertebrate life opened in every direction. Above, continents shift. Rivers carve new paths. On the margins of these changing shores, some lobe-finned fish begin to linger in very shallow waters, in tangled root beds and tidal flats, where water and land blur into each other. And in those quiet, murky places, the next chapter will begin. The margins of the Devonian seas are restless places. Shorelines creep and retreat as sea levels rise and fall. Rivers fan out into broad deltas, leaving behind tangled networks of channels, pools, and mudflats. In some regions, climates swing toward dryness. Wet seasons still flood the lowlands, but in between, water grows shallow, warm, and stagnant. In these in-between worlds, where water cannot always be trusted, some lobe-finned fishes begin to specialize. Their fins grow stronger at the base, more muscular, more capable of pushing, not just paddling. Their spines and ribs stiffen, giving their bodies a bit more support when gravity is not fully countered by water. Some develop internal sacs connected to the throat, primitive lungs or modified swim bladders that can gulp air when the water around them is poor in oxygen. They live in swamps and floodplains, in coastal lagoons that may be deep 1 month and a chain of shrinking puddles the next. When pools begin to dry, those with sturdy fins can heave themselves from one depression to another. Not gracefully, not quickly, but just enough. Enough to reach deeper water, enough to avoid being trapped. Over many generations, small changes accumulate. Fins widen at the ends, spreading bone and muscle into more effective platforms for pushing. Joints become clearer. One major bone near the body, then 2 farther out, then clusters of smaller elements. The shoulder girdle loosens from the skull, allowing the head to move more independently, freeing the neck. Eyes migrate upward, better placed to scan the air above, as well as the water below. Some of these transitional forms, like Tiktaalik and its relatives, are neither fully fish nor fully land animal by our standards. They can prop themselves up, lift their heads, perhaps even drag their bodies over short stretches of mud and vegetation. They remain tied to water for breeding, for buoyancy, for much of their feeding. But the door is open. Eventually, true limbs appear. Digits' early fingers and toes spread the weight more evenly. Wrists and ankles stiffen into functional hinges. Vertebrae lock more firmly together, supporting bodies that spend more time battling full gravity. Nostrils shift position, connecting to passages that lead to lungs. Breathing air becomes not just an emergency option, but a routine necessity. These early tetrapods do not march inland in a single heroic wave. They edge outward in fits and starts, some clinging to river margins, others exploring damp forests and floodplains. For a long time, life stays close to the water's edge, where eggs and young can still develop in pools and streams. But the shift is profound. Once vertebrates establish themselves on land, a new cascade of possibilities unfolds. Limbs become tools for more than just support. They climb, dig, leap, sprint. Spines bend and twist in new ways. Senses tune themselves to airborne smells, sounds, and vibrations. Where the Devonian seas were layered with niches in 3 dimensions of water, the continents now offer forests, deserts, mountains, and plains, vast unexplored spaces above the tide line. From these first landwalkers will come amphibians, then reptiles, then much later mammals and birds. Predators and prey reinvent their bodies again and again to match the challenges of solid ground. Claws, hooves, wings, and killing teeth all trace back, in distant outline, to those muscular lobe fins pushing through swampy shallows. Yet even as vertebrates spread across the continents, the ocean never stops calling some of them back. For animals already adapted to walking and breathing air, the shoreline is not a barrier but an invitation. Coastal waters are rich in food, shoals of fish, beds of shellfish, drifting carcasses. In the surf and in shallow bays, competition may be lower than on crowded land. Large bodies that move efficiently on 4 limbs can learn to wade, to swim, to pursue prey in the shallows. Over deep time, different lineages answer this invitation. Some reptiles slip back into lagoons and inland seas, their limbs flattening into paddles, their tails broadening into steering rudders. Later, certain mammals will follow a similar path, beginning as land dwellers that hunt along the coasts, then venturing farther out, their nostrils creeping higher on the head, their bodies thickening with insulating fat. These returns to the water are not reversals of evolution, not rewinds to an earlier state. They are new branches growing from trunks that already bear the imprint of land. Lungs, robust backbones, limb-based movement. The ocean receives them, but it shapes them in new ways, guided by pressures that echo old ones: buoyancy, drag, light, depth, the pursuit of food, but working on different starting materials. Evolution here is not a straight ladder from sea to land and onward to some final goal. It is a spreading web. One branch of lobe fins gives rise to early tetrapods, which in turn radiate into amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Other lobe fins remain in the water, becoming coelacanths and lungfish. Among the descendants of terrestrial reptiles, multiple lines will slip back into marine lifesome. Briefly, some for tens of millions of years. Among mammals, hoofed land animals will one day become sleek swimmers and deep divers. In this branching view, the shoreline is not a one-way border, but a permeable boundary, crossed and recrossed. The early experiments in limbs and lungs that played out in Devonian floodplains will, much later, be repurposed in bodies that fly above the waves and in those that glide silently through the depths. The same bones that once propped up a struggling fish in a drying pool will become the flippers of marine reptiles, the wing bones of seabirds, and the powerful strokes of future whales. For now, though, the continents are only beginning to fill. The seas still hold many of the great players, and new ones are on the way. As amphibians and early reptiles root themselves on land, some of their cousins will turn their gaze seaward. In the oceans of the Mesozoic, long after the Devonian has passed, these returning lineages will give rise to marine reptiles of striking shapes: sleek, paddle-limbed hunters, long-necked ambushers, and swift, deep-bodied swimmers. The stage is set for another reshaping of the seas, built on the legacy of fish, but carried now by creatures that have learned to walk, and then, in their own time, to swim again. The world has turned many pages since those first tentative steps onto land. The Devonian swamps are long gone. Continents have drifted, collided, and split. New mountain ranges rise and slowly wear down. Vast forests grow, fall, and are buried. Time flows forward into the era we call the Mesozoic, the age of reptiles on land, and something just as dramatic in the sea. The oceans themselves are changing. Sea levels rise and fall as climates warm and cool. At times, shallow epicontinental seas flood over the edges of continents, turning what is now dry interior land into broad, sunlit basins. Warm currents drift across low latitudes. Polar regions, for much of this time, are milder than today, with cool temperate seas instead of endless ice. In these shifting waters, new predators take shape. From land-dwelling reptiles, some lineages begin to spend more time along the coasts. They wade in surf zones, chase fish in tidal channels, scavenge washed-up carcasses. Their limbs are already strong for walking, their lungs efficient for breathing air. Over generations, those better suited to swimming than to running gain an advantage. One branch gives rise to the ichthyosaurs. At first, they may still look somewhat lizard-like, with long bodies and flexible spines, but as millions of years pass, their shape transforms under the steady pressure of moving through water. Bodies streamline into sleek, fish-like forms. Limbs flatten into stiff paddles, tails deepen into powerful vertical flukes. Nostrils remain on the head, lungs remain inside, but the silhouette converges on that of tuna and dolphins that will come much later. This is convergent evolution in motion. Very different ancestors, bony fish, cartilaginous sharks, land reptiles, and eventually mammals, are all shaped by similar demands: to cut cleanly through water, to accelerate quickly, to maneuver after prey. Fins, flippers, flukes, and tapered snouts appear again and again, not copied, but rediscovered by natural selection in separate lineages. Another group of reptiles follows a different path back to the sea and becomes plesiosaurs. Their trunks grow broad and barrel-shaped, buoyant and stable. Necks in some species stretch into long, flexible arcs, studded with many vertebrae. Heads at the tip carry sharp teeth for gripping slippery prey. All four limbs turn into strong, wing-like flippers. Instead of a single tail-driven thrust, their bodies fly through water with a four-paddle stroke, reminiscent of penguins or sea turtles, but scaled up to sizes larger than a bus. Later in the Cretaceous, mosasaurs arrive. These are closer, at first, to familiar lizards. They start near shore, then move outward. Their bodies elongate and become more rigid. Their tails develop deep, crescent-shaped flukes. Fore and hind limbs shorten and widen into efficient paddles. Jaws strengthen with hinge joints and tooth arrangements suited for gripping and swallowing large prey. In form and lifestyle, they echo both giant monitor lizards on land and the great predatory fish that share their seas. Around them, the marine world is not static. Coral reefs build intricate three-dimensional habitats in warm shallows. Plankton communities diversify, including tiny shelled creatures that will one day form chalk cliffs. Ammonites, the spiraled relatives of modern squids, rise and fall in enormous varieties, a drifting jet-propelled banquet. Teleost fishes, closer to many modern fish, begin to radiate, adding new shapes and behaviors to the open water. Food chains lengthen. Small plankton feed tiny crustaceans and fish larvae. Those feed larger fish, squid-like cephalopods and ammonites. Above them, mid-sized marine reptiles, sharks, and predatory fish hunt. At the top, giant ichthyosaurs, long-necked plesiosaurs, and later mosasaurs patrol as apex predators, filling roles that in other ages belonged to large sharks or whales. Despite their similarities to both fish and future cetaceans, these marine reptiles remain distinctly their own. They breathe air through lungs, surfacing between dives. They give birth to live young in the water, at least in many ichthyosaurs, likely in other groups, freeing them from the need to lay eggs on land. Their skeletons retain the pattern of terrestrial ancestors. The same basic limb bones reshaped into flippers, the same backbone reorganized for a life of swimming instead of walking. Over tens of millions of years, they flourish. Some ichthyosaurs evolve huge eyes for hunting in dim, deeper waters. Some plesiosaurs shorten their necks and broaden their heads, becoming close-range ambush hunters. Mosasaurs explore a range of sizes and prey, from fish and ammonites to other marine reptiles. The Mesozoic seas are not quiet. They are full of movement, pursuit, and the slow, constant turnover of species. And yet these dynasties do not last forever. Environmental conditions shift again. Oceans acidify and recover. Sea levels rise and fall. Continental positions change. Currents and climate. Competition from other predators, including advancing groups of modern-style sharks and teleost fish, may play a role. Some marine reptile lineages begin to decline before the final blow. At the end of the Cretaceous, a global catastrophe, likely the impact of a large asteroid, combined with intense volcanism and climate upheaval, reshapes life on land and in the sea. Non-avian dinosaurs vanish. So do ammonites. And the great Mesozoic marine reptiles already under pressure disappear from the fossil record. Their extinction is not the end of large ocean predators, only the end of one chapter. The sea remains full of opportunity. New lineages will rise to fill the emptied roles. Among them, some descendants of small hoofed mammals on land will begin their own journey shoreward, testing the shallows, then the open water, carrying with them lungs, limbs, and a terrestrial past ready to be written into whales. In the long quiet after catastrophe, the oceans do not stay empty. The shock of the end Cretaceous extinction ripples through every level of the marine web. Plankton communities change. Many large predators are gone. Entire food chains collapse and then slowly rebuild, like reefs after a storm. Mass extinctions do not just remove species. They clear ecological space. When top predators vanish, when common prey animals disappear, when reefs and coastal plains are reshaped, the rules of life shift. Niches that were tightly guarded become open territory. Lineages that once lived in the shadows, surviving at the edges, suddenly find room to expand. In the Paleocene and Eocene, the early chapters of the Cenozoic era, the post-dinosaur oceans begin to fill with new cast members. Modern-style sharks and rays take advantage of the open water and the recovering coasts. Some grow into swift, streamlined hunters. Others specialize in crushing shelled prey on the sea floor. Bony fishes, the teleosts that had quietly diversified in the Mesozoic, now radiate even more. Many of the groups familiar today, like herrings, tunas, and perches, trace their deeper roots to this time. Coral reefs hit hard but not destroyed everywhere. Rebuild with new combinations of corals and reef fish. Small, brightly scaled species begin to explore an astonishing variety of shapes and feeding strategies. Some nip algae from rocks, others pluck plankton from the water column, some lurk as camouflaged ambush predators waiting for a careless passerby. Above them, in the sunlit zone, new patterns of movement appear in the air as well as the water. With the great marine reptiles gone, birds begin to claim more of the open sea. From small shore-nesting ancestors, lineages give rise to early forms of what will become penguins, albatrosses, petrels, and a diversity of seabirds. Some dive from the air, folding wings as they spear into schools of fish. Others glide for hours over waves, covering vast distances on narrow wings that sick the wind. Along the coasts, mammals are also testing the boundary. Some, related to early hoofed and carnivorous forms, forage in tidal flats, estuaries, and shallow bays. Over time, a few groups become increasingly comfortable in the water. Otter-like ancestors slide through kelp beds. Bear-like carnivores wade deeper after fish. From these experiments will come seals, sea lions, and walruses pinnipeds, whose limbs flatten into flippers, whose bodies round out with insulating fat, whose lives are split between land breeding grounds and rich feeding grounds at sea. These changes unfold against a background that is shifting in ways no animal can perceive directly. The slow rearrangement of continents and currents. As the Atlantic Ocean widens, as India collides with Asia, as Antarctica drifts into colder latitudes, and begins to gather ice. Ocean circulation reorganizes. New deep water currents form, looping between poles and equator. Upwelling zones places where cold, nutrient-rich water rises toward the surface, strengthen in some regions and fade in others. Where nutrients concentrate, life follows. Coastal upwelling supports dense blooms of plankton, which feeds swarms of small fish, which in turn attract larger predators. Migratory pathways emerge even if the animals following them have no map, only inherited instincts, tuned to temperature, day length, and the scent and chemistry of the sea. Climates warm in some epochs, allowing lush tropical seas to spread. Then they cool, contracting warm water habitats and favoring species adapted to colder, more oxygen-rich conditions. Changing coastlines also sculpt evolution. Rising and falling sea levels flood low-lying areas, creating broad, shallow seas, then drain them again, turning marine corridors into land bridges. Populations of fish, birds, and mammals are sometimes isolated in basins or enclosed seas. Cut off from their relatives, they drift along their own evolutionary paths, experimenting with new sizes, new feeding habits, new defenses. Through all of this, the ocean story is one of repeated loss and renewal. Entire ways of life vanish: ammonites, mosasaurs, many ancient reef builders, and yet the functional roles they held seldom remain empty for long. Different lineages, with different ancestries, step into similar jobs. Large filter feeders, fast pursuit hunters, bottom-sifting grazers, reef architects. The cast changes, the costumes change, but certain patterns keep returning. By the early Cenozoic, the stage is set for one of the most remarkable of these returns. On land, in warm coastal plains and river deltas bordering the Tethys and other ancient seas, small hoofed mammals are living ordinary lives. They graze, they browse, they drink from the shallows. Some of them begin to wade after plants and small prey, to swim short distances, to explore the water just beyond the riverbank. Around them, the post-extinction oceans are already humming with new fish, new sharks, new birds, and the first true marine mammals like primitive sea cows. Currents are in place that can carry travelers across entire basins. Food is plentiful in many coastal zones. The sea, once dominated by reptiles, is ready to welcome a new kind of giant. From these tentative shoreline visitors, a lineage will soon emerge that abandons the land almost entirely, trading legs for flippers, nostrils for blowholes, and forests for the open blue. The modern oceans we know, with their tunas and penguins, seals and great rorquals, will not be built in a single step, but in countless small shifts, each one resting on the ruins of what came before. Among those small-hoofed mammals on ancient riverbanks, one particular branch begins to stand out. They are artiodactyls, even-toed ungulates, distant kin to animals that will one day include deer, cattle, and hippos. For a long time, their connection to whales is invisible, hidden beneath layers of bone and time. But in the rocks of what was once the shore of the Tethys Sea, the record starts to whisper. In the early Eocene, around 50 million years ago, a creature moves along a coastal river. It looks at first glance like a land animal. It has 4 legs, a long tail, a narrow snout. It can walk on solid ground. Yet its bones tell a more complicated story. We call it Pachycetus. Pachycetus probably spent much of its time near the water's edge, hunting in shallow streams and lagoons. Its skeleton shows the hallmark features of early whales, especially in the structure of the ear. The bones of its middle and inner ear, encased in a thickened bony shell, resemble those of later whales much more than those of typical land mammals. This specialized ear would eventually become exquisitely tuned for hearing underwater. In Pachycetus, the first steps are already there. From Pachycetus and its close relatives, the path curves further into the water. A little later in time, another animal appears, Ambulocetus. Its name means the walking whale, and it fits. Ambulocetus is large, crocodile-like, with limbs powerful enough to bear its weight on land, yet shaped in a way that suggests strong swimming. Its feet are broad, its spine is flexible. Its pelvis, though still connected to the backbone, is shifting, loosening, beginning to accommodate a different style of motion. Ambulocetus may have hunted much like a crocodile lurking in murky shallows, then lunging upward with jaws open toward animals coming to drink. But unlike a reptile, it carries with it the mammalian toolkit of warm blood, parental care, and, increasingly, ears adapting to listen through water. Its life is already divided between worlds. As time passes and generations turn, more fully aquatic forms appear, grouped under the name Archaeocetes, ancient whales. Some, like Rhodocetus and Protocetus, still have hind limbs, though they are shrinking. The pelvis becomes less firmly attached to the spine, the tail grows more muscular. The vertebrae begin to show adaptations for powerful up and down strokes, rather than simple running. The body elongates and streamlines. Nostrils, once at the tip of the snout, begin to migrate backward along the skull, a slow journey that will eventually place them atop the head as blowholes. By the time we reach baselosaurids such as Basilosaurus and Dorodon, the transition has gone much further. These animals no longer walk on land. Their hind legs are tiny, reduced to small external limbs with no role in locomotion, perhaps retained for mating or lost function entirely. Their forelimbs have become flippers, rigid paddles for steering. Propulsion now comes from the tail, which likely bears a horizontal fluke like that of modern whales and dolphins. The skulls of these early whales stretch into long, toothy shapes. Many are active predators, chasing fish and other marine animals in open water. Their vertebrae are light but strong, built for undulating through the sea rather than bearing weight on solid ground. The ear structures are now clearly specialized for underwater hearing, with bony features that help isolate sound vibrations from the skull and focus them within the inner ear. Why take this path back into the water at all? The details are still debated, but several patterns appear likely. Coastal seas of the early Cenozoic were rich feeding grounds. Fish, squid-like cephalopods, and other prey flourished in warm, shallow shelves. For a land mammal able to swim, this would have been an inviting, relatively untapped resource. On land, competition and predators were already established. In the water, for mammals at least, the field was more open. Returning to the sea also offers stability. Temperatures fluctuate less. Food can be abundant year-round along productive coasts. For an animal that can solve the challenges of breathing air while swimming, of moving efficiently through water, of keeping warm in a liquid world, the rewards can be great. The fossil record does not give us every step. There are gaps, and scientists still discuss the precise relationships between some early whale families, the exact habitats they favored, the way their swimming styles evolved. Some reconstructions are revised as new discoveries emerge. Yet the broad outline is now widely supported. We see land-dwelling artiodactyls with certain ankle and ear features. We see shoreline hunters like Pakicetus with whale-like ears but walking bodies. We see semi-aquatic forms like Ambulocetus moving with undulating spines and paddle-like feet. We see archaeocetes with shrinking hind limbs, migrating nostrils, and increasingly flexible tails. And finally, we see fully aquatic whales, limbs transformed, bodies streamlined, lives committed to the water. Over millions of years, what began as tentative wading in coastal shallows becomes powerful, confident, swimming across open seas. Each small anatomical change, an ear thickening, a pelvis loosening, a tail strengthening, adds up to a profound transformation. The descendants of those riverbank mammals will soon leave the shore behind entirely, trading the security of solid ground for the vast, three-dimensional world of the open ocean. In that blue expanse, another chapter of whale evolution waits, where size, sound and migration will reshape not only the animals themselves, but the very rhythms of the seas they inhabit. From those early fully aquatic whales, another quiet branching begins. Skulls shorten, jaws thicken, teeth change. The bones of the face and forehead start to arch and dome. Deep inside, the nasal passages and the sinuses rearrange themselves, not for breathing alone, but for something stranger. Sound. Modern whales fall into two great lineages. One will abandon teeth almost entirely. The other will turn sound itself into a hunting tool. The first branch leads to the baleen whales. The mysticetes. Their ancestors still had teeth, but the pattern of their jaws begins to shift. Grooves and blood vessel traces along the upper jaw suggest soft tissue where none existed before. Over time, instead of sharp individual teeth, sheets of keratin grow from the palate, hanging like curtains, baleen. With baleen, a new way of feeding emerges. Instead of chasing single fish, baleen whales can engulf entire swarms of tiny prey, krill, small fish, copepods, then push the water out through the baleen, trapping the food within. Some do this by swimming slowly, with mouths open, sieving as they go. Others develop a more dramatic strategy. In rorquals, like the blue whale and the humpback, the lower jaw becomes a giant, flexible scoop. The throat and belly are lined with pleated grooves that can expand like an accordion. In a single lunge, a rorqual can engulf a volume of water larger than its own body. Muscles and elastic tissues then contract, forcing the water back out through the baleen. What remains is a dense bolus of life. Filter feeding at this scale is only possible under certain conditions. The oceans must be rich. Upwellings must bring nutrients from the deep. Phytoplankton must bloom in sunlit waters. Krill and small fish must gather in vast, shimmering clouds. Over the past 30 million years, shifts in climate, currents, and the arrangement of continents have created such conditions again and again. When productive zones intensified, baleen whales had the tools to take advantage of them. The other great branch, the odontocetes, kept their teeth, but transformed their senses. Toothed whales, dolphins, porpoises, sperm whales, beaked whales evolved echolocation, the ability to see with sound. The skull in many of these animals becomes asymmetrical. The melon, a rounded mass of specialized fat and tissue in the forehead, develops as an acoustic lens. Air sacs and passages near the blowhole become the source of rapid clicks. Those clicks travel through water, strike objects, and bounce back. The returning echoes are received through the lower jaw and skull, then interpreted by a brain increasingly wired for three-dimensional acoustic maps. In darkness, in murky water, in the midnight zones of the deep sea, toothed whales can build a picture of their surroundings using nothing but sound. This opens up worlds that were once difficult for large air breathers to exploit. Beaked whales slip silently into deep canyons, diving for squid in cold black water, then rising again after an hour or more below. Sperm whales, with huge oil-filled heads, adapted for focusing sound, descend well over a kilometre, perhaps more, in pursuit of giant squid and other deep-dwelling prey. Their rib cages and lungs adapt to collapse safely under pressure. Their muscles bind and store oxygen, their hearts slow, their bodies become instruments finely tuned to the rhythms of descent and ascent. As echolocation refines, hunting social lives shift as well. Toothed whales form pods, clans, and extended families, communicating through whistles, clicks, and patterned calls. Information passes between generations. Where to feed, when to migrate, how to navigate complex coastlines and seamounts. Culture, in a broad sense, emerges in the sea. Meanwhile, in both baleen and toothed whales, another trend unfolds. Size. Water, with its buoyant support, frees bodies from the strict weight limits of land. At the same time, rich patches of prey encourage a strategy of big, energy-efficient movement across long distances. Larger bodies hold more oxygen, more blubber for insulation, more muscle for travel. They also lose heat more slowly, a crucial advantage in cold, nutrient-rich waters. Over millions of years, especially in the last 5 to 10 million, some baleen whales push body size to extremes. The blue whale, feeding on tiny krill, grows to become the largest known animal in the history of life. Its heart is bigger than a person, its tongue outweighs an elephant. With each dive into a blooming krill swarm, it harvests the energy of entire microscopic food webs. Whales do not simply occupy the oceans, they reshape them. By feeding in one region and defecating in another, they move nutrients vertically and horizontally, fertilizing surface waters and stimulating plankton growth. Their migrations link polar seas to temperate and tropical zones. Carcasses that sink to the seafloor whale falls create sudden oases, supporting unique communities of scavengers, worms, and bacteria for decades. Whale bodies become temporary islands in the deep. As climates fluctuate and ice ages come and go, whale populations track shifting lines of productivity. Some species migrate thousands of kilometers each year, timing their journeys to the pulse of seasons and the blooming of plankton. Others remain more local, specializing in particular coasts, shelves, or basins. In each case, their evolution is braided tightly with changing currents, temperatures, and the rise and fall of prey. From shore-hugging hunters in Eocene lagoons to today's deep-diving sperm whales and filter-feeding blue giants, the whale lineage traces one of evolution's most complete returns to the sea. Limbs become flippers, tails become engines, skulls become resonant chambers, and the mammalian brain learns to think in 3 dimensions of water and sound. The story that began with armored fishes and simple jaws now flows through these vast breathing bodies. The first vertebrates ventured into shallow seas, exploring what it meant to have a backbone in water. Later, some of their descendants left for land, sprouting legs and lungs, filling forests, plains, and riverbanks. And then, from those very riverbanks, a few lineages turned back toward the waves, trading hooves for flukes, nostrils for blowholes, and footsteps for migrations across entire ocean basins. Tonight, as the modern ocean lies dark and wide, whales move quietly beneath its surface. Their songs and clicks travel through layers of water, shaped by distant winds and ancient currents. Their shadows pass over reefs, canyons, and seamounts built by millions of years of life. In them, the long journey from the first fish to the giants of today's seas is still unfolding. One breath, one dive, one slow, steady migration at a time. The ocean remembers. It remembers the first fish-like vertebrates, thin bodies tracing cautious paths through Ordovician shallows. It remembers jaws appearing, teeth biting, armored plates glinting in dim green light. It remembers the age of fishes, when sharks and bony fish filled every niche they could find, from coral thickets to open pelagic blue. It remembers the moments some fins thickened into limbs and pressed against muddy bottoms, when lungs and legs opened away onto land. And it remembers the later footsteps that turned back, when hoofed mammals eased into warm Eocene bays, their bodies surrendering, bone by bone, to the pull of the sea, until they became whales. Across hundreds of millions of years, ocean life has been written and rewritten by innovation and loss, new ways of feeding, swimming, and sensing, extinctions that cleared ecosystems like storms, survivors that adapted, radiated, and, sometimes, returned. Tonight, as you rest, you are lying in one brief moment of that long memory. If this journey has gently kept you company, you can like this video, subscribe for more quiet stories, and leave a comment, tell us where you're listening from, and let your own small wave join the ocean of time.